If you think you need a huge backyard, deep garden beds, or acres of land to grow fresh, crunchy cucumbers, think again. One of my favorite ways to grow cucumbers is surprisingly simple. I grow them in ordinary jugs right on my rooftop. And the best part is that this method can work in surprisingly small spaces. Whether you have a rooftop, balcony, patio, terrace, or even a tiny sunny corner, you can turn containers into a productive little cucumber garden. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how I do it, what I put inside those jugs, how I support the vines, how I handle watering, and the mistakes that can turn a promising container cucumber into a disappointing harvest. Welcome back to Daily Garden Gate, where we make gardening simpler, more practical, and more productive. Now, before we get into the actual planting process, let me tell you why I like growing cucumbers in jugs so much. Cucumbers are naturally vigorous plants. Give them warmth, sunlight, moisture, nutrients, and something to climb, and they can grow incredibly quickly. But that same vigorous growth can become a problem when space is limited. The vines spread everywhere, the roots need consistent moisture, and the fruit can become stressed if the container is too small or dries out too frequently. Growing them in a properly prepared jug gives you control over the growing environment while keeping the plant off the ground. And there's another reason this method is so useful. Containers allow you to garden where traditional gardening simply isn't practical. Rooftops often have plenty of sunlight but no soil. Concrete patios may have no planting beds at all. Apartments may have balconies but nowhere to dig. A jug changes the equation. Instead of asking, where can I find enough garden soil, you start asking, where can I place a container that gets enough sunlight? That opens up a completely different way of thinking about food gardening. Now, the first thing you need is the right jug. When I say jug, I'm talking about a sturdy container large enough to support a cucumber plant through the growing season. A large plastic water or utility jug can work, provided it is clean, sturdy, and suitable for growing plants. I don't recommend using a tiny container simply because it is available. Remember, cucumber roots need room to develop, and a larger volume of growing medium gives you more stability in moisture and nutrients. If you have a choice between a flimsy little container and a larger, stronger one, go with the larger option. Before you add any soil, drainage is one of the most important things to think about. Cucumbers like consistent moisture, but that does not mean they want their roots sitting in stagnant water. A container without drainage can quickly become a problem. Water accumulates around the roots, air is displaced from the growing medium, and the plant can begin to struggle. So make sure the bottom of your jug has several drainage openings. If the container is large, you want enough openings for excess water to escape freely rather than collecting at the bottom. I also like to think about where the jug will sit before I fill it. This is something container gardeners sometimes learn the hard way. A large jug filled with moist growing medium can become surprisingly heavy. Once the cucumber plant is established, moving the container can become even more difficult, so choose your location first. If you're gardening on a rooftop, make sure the location is appropriate for containers and that you are not blocking drainage paths or creating a hazard. Safety and structural considerations always come before gardening.
Next comes the growing medium. One of the biggest mistakes people make with container gardening is treating ordinary ground soil as though it were automatically ideal for a container. In a garden bed, soil has an enormous surrounding environment. In a container, the roots are confined to a relatively small space. You want a growing medium that drains well while still holding enough moisture for the plant. A quality container or potting mix is usually a better starting point than simply filling the jug with heavy garden soil. You can improve your container mix with mature compost, but moderation matters. Compost can provide organic matter and nutrients, but you don't need to turn the container into a pile of compost. The goal is a balanced growing medium with good drainage, moisture retention, and enough nutrients to support vigorous growth. If your mix becomes too dense, water may move poorly. If it drains too rapidly and dries out constantly, the cucumber can also suffer. Think balance rather than extremes. Once the jug is prepared, it's time to plant. You can start cucumbers from seed or use young seedlings. If you're starting from seed, plant according to the seed packet's recommended depth rather than burying the seed deeply. Give the seeds enough moisture to encourage germination, but avoid turning the container into a swamp. During this stage, consistency is more important than flooding the soil with water. One thing I really enjoy about starting cucumbers from seed is watching how quickly they can transform. First, you see a tiny seedling. Then the first true leaves appear. Soon, the plant starts producing larger leaves, and before you realize it, the vine begins searching for something to climb. This is when your container garden starts becoming interesting. But don't wait until the plant has become a tangled mass to think about support. Give the cucumber a climbing structure early. This is especially important on a rooftop. You don't want cucumber vines crawling randomly across walkways or becoming exposed to unnecessary damage. A simple trellis, sturdy netting, or another appropriate climbing support can guide the vines upward. Vertical growing is one of the biggest advantages of container cucumbers. Instead of allowing the plant to consume valuable floor space, you encourage it to use vertical space. The result can be a much more organized garden and easier access to the developing fruit. As the cucumber grows, gently guide the young vine toward the support. You don't need to force it into place. Cucumbers naturally produce tendrils that help them climb, but early guidance can make the process much easier. Think of yourself as directing the plant rather than controlling it. Once the vine catches onto the support, it can begin climbing on its own. Now, let's talk about sunlight because this can make or break your container cucumber project. Cucumbers are warm season plants that generally perform best with plenty of sunlight. A rooftop can actually be an excellent environment because it may receive strong direct light for much of the day. But strong rooftop sunlight also comes with a challenge. Containers can heat up and dry out faster than garden beds.
That means watering becomes one of your most important jobs. Don't create a rigid rule that says every cucumber must receive exactly the same amount of water every day. Weather changes, container size changes, plant size changes, wind changes, temperature changes. Instead, check the growing medium regularly. If the upper portion is drying and the plant needs water, water thoroughly enough for moisture to reach the root zone while allowing excess water to drain away. During very hot or windy periods, your jugs may dry much faster than you expect. A cucumber plant can have a surprisingly large amount of leafy growth compared with the relatively small amount of growing medium surrounding its roots. Leaves lose moisture, and the plant depends on the roots to replace it. If the container repeatedly dries out completely, the plant may wilt and growth can slow. Consistent moisture is the goal. At the same time, don't respond to every wilted-looking leaf with immediately flooding the container. Plants can droop temporarily during intense heat, even when the soil still contains moisture. Check the growing medium before watering heavily. This simple habit can prevent both underwatering and overwatering. Another important factor is feeding. Cucumbers are productive plants, and producing lots of leaves, flowers, and fruit requires nutrients. A good container mix can provide an initial supply, but nutrients may become depleted as the plant grows. This is where a balanced fertilizer or appropriate organic feeding program can help. Follow the product instructions carefully rather than assuming that more fertilizer equals more cucumbers. Too much fertilizer can create its own problems. You may end up with excessive leafy growth without the fruit production you expected, or you may stress the roots. Container gardening is all about balance. The plant needs enough nutrients to grow strongly, but not an unlimited supply dumped into a confined root zone. As your cucumber begins flowering, you may notice something very interesting. Not every flower immediately becomes a cucumber. That is completely normal. Cucumbers produce different types of flowers, and pollination can play an important role in fruit development depending on the variety. If your plant is flowering heavily but producing little fruit, take a closer look at the variety you're growing and the pollination conditions around your rooftop garden. This is where rooftop gardening can become surprisingly fascinating. Even when you're several stories above ground, pollinating insects may still visit flowers if the area is accessible to them. Bees and other insects can contribute to pollination. Creating a garden environment that welcomes beneficial insects can make your rooftop growing space more productive and more enjoyable.
And then comes the moment every cucumber grower waits for, seeing that first tiny cucumber forming beneath a flower. It may start incredibly small, almost easy to miss, but check again a few days later and you may be surprised by how quickly it has developed. This is one of the reasons cucumbers are so rewarding for gardeners who enjoy watching fast growth. Harvesting is another area where timing matters. Don't always wait for cucumbers to become enormous. Many varieties are best harvested while they are young and tender. Regular harvesting also keeps the plant focused on continued production. If you leave mature fruits hanging for too long, the plant may shift its energy toward those developing seeds rather than continuing to produce the way you want. I like to check my cucumber containers regularly during the harvesting period. Look beneath the leaves, around the trellis, and along the stems. Cucumbers can hide surprisingly well. A fruit that seems invisible one day can suddenly be much larger a few days later. Regular harvesting keeps you ahead of those hidden cucumbers and gives you the best chance of enjoying them at the stage you prefer. Now, let's talk about one of the most common mistakes: planting too many cucumber plants in one jug. Because the seedlings look so small at the beginning, it's tempting to think, why not plant several? But those tiny seedlings don't stay tiny. They become vigorous plants with large leaves and extensive roots. Crowding can increase competition for water, nutrients, light, and air circulation. Instead of trying to squeeze as many plants as possible into one container, focus on giving each plant enough room to perform well. One strong, healthy cucumber plant can be far more productive and manageable than several overcrowded plants competing inside the same container. Another mistake is choosing a container that is simply too small. The plant may survive, but survival isn't the goal. We want healthy growth and reliable production. A larger container gives the root system more room and provides a greater buffer against rapid changes in moisture. If your rooftop gets hot and windy, that extra volume can be particularly helpful. Then there's the issue of wind. Rooftops can be much windier than sheltered gardens. A cucumber plant growing vertically can act almost like a sail, especially once the foliage becomes dense. That's why your trellis and container need to be stable. A strong gust of wind should not be able to tip the entire setup over. Secure the support appropriately and position containers where they are protected from dangerous exposure while still receiving good sunlight. You should also keep an eye on the leaves. Healthy cucumber leaves are generally broad and vigorous, but changes in appearance can tell you something about the plant's environment. Yellowing leaves, persistent wilting, damaged foliage, or unusual spots can be signals that something needs attention. Don't immediately reach for a chemical treatment just because you see a blemish. First, consider watering, sunlight, nutrition, airflow, pests, and the age of the leaf. Pests can also become a problem. Cucumber plants may attract insects that feed on tender growth and leaves. The best strategy is to inspect your plants regularly so you catch problems early. Look under leaves and around growing tips. A small pest population is much easier to manage than an infestation that has been ignored for weeks. One of the advantages of container gardening is that you can monitor individual plants closely. In a huge garden, one problem can sometimes go unnoticed. With a handful of jugs, you can walk around your rooftop and inspect each plant. You know which container needs more water, which one is flowering, which one is producing fruit, and which one might need attention. And don't underestimate the value of harvesting your own cucumber from a container you planted yourself.
There is something satisfying about walking onto a rooftop, checking a plant growing in what was once an ordinary jug, and finding fresh cucumbers hanging from the vine. It transforms an otherwise unused space into a productive growing area. If you want to take this method even further, think about succession planting. You don't necessarily have to plant every cucumber at exactly the same time. Depending on your climate and growing season, starting another container at an appropriate interval can help spread out your harvest. Instead of having everything mature at once, you can potentially create a more continuous supply. You can also experiment with different cucumber varieties. Some are better suited to compact spaces than others. Look for varieties that match your available growing space and your intended use. Some are excellent for slicing fresh, while others are popular for pickling. The important thing is to choose a variety that fits your environment rather than simply buying the first seed packet you see. What I love most about growing cucumbers in jugs is that it changes the way you think about gardening. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need a giant vegetable patch. You don't even need traditional garden beds. You need a suitable container, a good growing medium, enough sunlight, consistent care, and a little patience. And if you're gardening on a rooftop, remember that the goal isn't to create the biggest possible plant. The goal is to create a productive plant that you can manage. Train the vines upward, keep the container stable, monitor moisture, feed appropriately, watch for pests, harvest regularly. Those simple habits can make an enormous difference.
So if you have an unused rooftop, balcony, terrace, patio, or sunny outdoor corner, look around before you decide that you don't have enough space to grow food. That space might be more valuable than you realize. A few carefully placed containers can become a miniature vegetable garden, and cucumbers are one of the crops that can make that transformation especially rewarding. And remember, the jug itself isn't the magic. The magic is creating the right environment inside that jug. The container gives the roots a defined space. The growing medium gives them somewhere to grow. Drainage keeps excess water moving away. Sunlight powers the plant. Water supports growth. Nutrients provide the raw materials for development. The trellis gives the vines somewhere to climb, and your regular attention ties all of those pieces together. If you're trying this for the first time, don't feel like you need to build an enormous rooftop cucumber farm immediately. Start with 1 or 2 containers. Learn how quickly they dry out. Watch how the vines grow. Pay attention to how much sunlight the location receives. Observe when flowers appear and when fruit begins forming. Once you've learned what works in your particular environment, you can expand gradually. That's the beauty of gardening. Every season teaches you something. One container might stay too dry, another might receive too much wind, one variety might perform beautifully while another struggles. Instead of seeing those differences as failures, use them as information. Your garden is constantly showing you what it needs. So if you've ever looked at a rooftop or small outdoor space and thought, there's no way I can grow vegetables here, I hope this gives you a different perspective. With a sturdy jug, suitable growing medium, drainage, sunlight, water, support, and regular care, you can create a productive cucumber growing system even without a traditional garden bed. And when that first cucumber's ready, don't forget the most important part: harvest it, bring it inside, and enjoy the fact that you grew food in a space that might otherwise have been completely unused. That's what container gardening is really about. It's about finding possibilities where other people see limitations. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to Daily Garden Gate for more practical gardening ideas, clever container growing methods, seasonal tips, and simple ways to grow more food in the space you already have. And if you're growing cucumbers in containers, tell me in the comments what kind of container you're using and where you're growing them. I'd love to hear what you're experimenting with. Until next time, keep growing, keep experimenting, and remember, you don't always need more land to grow more food. Sometimes you just need to look at the space you already have in a completely different way. See you in the next video here on Daily Garden Gate.